Hello, once again. Good to have you here. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the study. Luke chapter 19 is where we are at this evening. So before we go any farther, we'll pray. Great and mighty God, thank you once again for your word. Pray that you'll bless us in our endeavors to open it, to consider it, and to adhere to its precepts and teachings. Bless us in these endeavors, and we will give you praise in Jesus' name. Luke chapter number 19. As Jesus was entering Jericho and was passing through it, a man named Zacchaeus appeared. He was a leading tax collector, and a rich one at that. He was trying to see Jesus, who Jesus was, so he couldn't do so to the crowd since he was a short man. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus, who was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the tree, he looked up and he said, "Zacchaeus, hurry, come down. I must stay at your house today." Zacchaeus came down quickly and was glad to welcome him into his home. But all the people who saw this began to complain, "Jesus is going to be the guest of a notorious sinner." Later, Zacchaeus stood up and announced to the Lord, "Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor. I'll pay 4 times as much as I owe if I've cheated anyone in any way." And Jesus told him, "Today salvation has come to this home, because this man, also a descendant of Abraham, and the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost." Well, of the known professions of the day, being a publican or a tax collector assuredly held the most disdain among the Jews. These men collected money from the people that were earmarked to go to Rome for taxes. Tax rate was never ordinarily published, so many of them kept for themselves sizable portions. With few exceptions, these men were less than honorable, and Zacchaeus was surely one of the most dishonest of them all. And what we find out is they kept a few coins for themselves. These guys were thieves and cheats, and they were traitors to the people, the Jews. Well, hated and despised by the common people, the fact that Jesus went to dine in the house of such a man as this was a testament of his love for all men, regardless of their past sins. Jesus came to save all, thieves being on the list as well. As they were listening to this, Jesus went on to tell the parable because he was near Jerusalem and because the people sought that the kingdom of God would appear immediately. So he said, a prince went into a distant country to be appointed king and then to return. He called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 coins. He told them, "Invest this money till I come back." But the citizens of the country hated him and sent a delegation to follow him and to announce, "We don't want this man to rule over us." After he was appointed king, the prince came back. He ordered the servants to whom he had given the money to be called so he could find out what they had earned by investing. The first servant came and said, "Sir, your coin has earned 10 more coins." The king told him, "Well done, good servant, because you have been trustworthy in a very small thing. Take charge of 10 cities." The second servant came and said, "Your coin, sir, has earned 5 coins." The king told him, "You take charge of 5 cities." Continue in verse number 20. Then the other servants came and said, "Look, sir, here's your coin. I've kept it in a cloth for safekeeping, because I was afraid of you. You're a hard man. You withdraw what you didn't deposit and harvest what you didn't plant." The king told him, "I will judge you according to your own words, you evil servant. You knew, did you, that I was a hard man, that I withdrew what I didn't deposit and harvest what I didn't plant? Why then didn't you put my money in the bank? When I returned, I could have collected it with interest." So the king told those stand by, "Take the coin away from him and give it to the man who has 10 coins. They answered him, "Sir, he already has 10 coins. Then I tell you, to everyone who has something, more will be given. But from the person who has nothing, even that which he has will be taken away. But as for these enemies of mine who didn't want me to be their king, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence." Well, should we determine the nobleman is God on this particular parable, then it offers much to our ears and to our hearts. Now, stated are the following truths. 10 were given, as it were, the treasures of the nobleman and tasked to occupy until he returns. Verse 14 holds that the citizens hated the nobleman and refused to have him reign over them. Only 2 of the 10 returned to have their profits revealed. The one who showed that the money had been entrusted had earned 10 coins, he was rewarded accordingly. The one who had earned 5 coins was also rewarded. The slothful servant was so bold as to hide his lord's money in a napkin. Here in the Greek references a sweat cloth, something you wipe sweat off your brow with. That's all it meant to him, hiding the money. We can take $1 and hide it for 100 years, and when it's revealed again, it's not worth $1 anymore. Money not invested is not worth what it was yesterday. What the slothful servant could have earned, he didn't. Simple interest would have been sufficient. His apparent fear of the nobleman found little sympathy. Those who have been faithful with what they have been entrusted find themselves rewarded with far more than they were originally in possession of. Adversely understood, that those who were not faithful will lose all that they possessed. Remember, you don't own anything. Everything you have, your health, your vision, your hearing, everything, no matter what you drive, where you live, how much money is in your bank account, you're a steward of that. And God expects you to use the talents and the abilities He's given you wisely. The finality of the parable is simply those who refused to submit and be ruled over found themselves facing the punishment of death. Well, this as much as I want to tell you, no one is saved to sit. No one is forgiven and then allowed not to forgive others. No one is loved and allowed to hate. No one is given a talent to hide it. The day of reckoning soon approaches. Well, as God has done unto us, He does to all. You see, we are entrusted with abilities and talents that go unused, go wasted. All are given capacities according to their ability, and our gift back to God is what we do with what we are entrusted. Those who God can trust, He blesses with more, and those who He cannot trust find themselves lacking. The day comes when all men will give an account of what they had done with what God has given them, be it money or talent or ability, regardless. All are awarded according to their results. I surmise the following. Once again, nobody's saved to sit. If you can sing, sing for God. Nobody is forgiven and then allowed not to forgive others. You must forgive if you wish to be forgiven. Nobody is allowed to love and to hate. No one is to take a talent that he is given and not use it. If you can administer, if you can preach, if you can teach, if you can play a piano, then do it for God. Because once again, the day of reckoning, eventually it gets here. Verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he traveled on and went up to Jerusalem. When he came near Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples on ahead. And he said, "Go unto the village ahead of you. As you enter, you will find a colt tied that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it along. If anyone asks you why you are untying it, say, the Lord needs it." So those who were sent went off and found as Jesus had told them. While they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" The disciples answered, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought the colt to Jesus and put their coats on it, and Jesus sat upon it. Now, a quick word. They take their coats and they put it on this animal, and then he sits on the coats. Now, the idea is very simply to lift him higher. Now, he did this to kings. We find this in the Old Testament in a few different places. But what happened was the king was to be lifted up higher than most men. And that's what they did. They put their coats on the animal. He sat on the coats. Therefore, he was lifted up higher than anyone else. He was the king. Verse 36. As he was riding along, people kept spreading their coats on the road. Once again, the same thing. They put palm branches on the grounds, as we find out, and we put their coats on there, again, lifting him up higher and higher. Service for a king. Verse 37. He was now approaching the descent, the Mount of Olives. The whole crowd of disciples began to rejoice and to praise God with a loud voice because of all the miracles they had seen. They said, "How blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory in the highest heaven." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd told Jesus, "Teacher, tell your disciples to be quiet." And he replied, "I tell you, if they're quiet, the stones would immediately cry out." Well, Jesus will now begin the trek into the city of his death. The crowds gathered to pay homage and adoration to the one whom they saw as their promised Messiah or King. Riding in on a colt was the outward sign of a servant, not a king. The first coming of Jesus finds him here as a servant. The second coming will find him as a conquering king. You see, here he rode on a colt. a donkey, lowly as a servant. Kings rode on horses, and when he comes back the second time, well, I guess you understand what he's going to be riding. It won't be a donkey. The always present Pharisees, looking to find any fault they could, use a blasphemous act, quickly chastising him for allowing the people to make him king. His response was real simple. They don't praise me, the rocks will. The significance of the statement, the rocks will cry out, cannot be overstated. Nature and all of creation itself will give praise unto God. All men will give praise as well as either now as the result of our love for him or at journey's end. When I was a kid, I saw a bird outside, and I saw it take a drink of water, and it rose its head up. And we understand now that it was to allow the water to trickle down its throat. I asked my mom, just as a little boy, I said, why is he raising his head? Why does he take a drink of water and then raise his head? And Mom said, he's giving praise. I never forgot that. Well, all history now points to this single triumphant event when the promised Messiah of all mankind would present itself. Soon, however, the crowd that cheered him would be calling for his death. This he knew. Verse 41. When he came closer and saw the city, he began to grieve over it. If you had only known today would have been brought you peace, but now it is hidden from your sight. Because days will come when your enemies will build walls around you, surround you and enclose you in on every side. They will level you to the ground, you and those who live within your city limits. They will not leave one stone upon another within your walls, because you didn't recognize the time when God came to help you. Now, looking at these 4 verses, Jesus says this, and this is a prophecy, but it will soon, within what we understand to be about 38 years later, come to fruition. You see, he held them responsible to know their Messiah. He held them responsible to know the times, and they should have accepted him as their Messiah. Because what would happen in 70 AD is Rome would attack Jerusalem. The Roman army with the 5th, 10th, 12th, and 15th legions of Rome would lay siege against Jerusalem, and they would kill 1 million Jews with the sword. Another 500,000 would die as a direct result of the famine and disease and the bloodshed that lay in the streets. 1.5 million Jews who refused to listen, who refused to believe, lost their lives. Interesting as well, those who remember what he said here 38 years later when they saw Rome, they decided the Messiah was right. We got to get out of here. And they did. Not one believer, not one Christian who saw Rome come and remembered what Jesus said lost their life. They left quickly. They went to Pella, and there they stayed until the siege was over. Jesus was correct. Well, continuing in verse 45 through 48, then Jesus went to the temple and began to throw out those who were selling things. He told them, it is written, my house will be called a prayer, but you have turned it into a hideout for bandits. And he began teaching the temple every day. How the high priests, the scribes, the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him. But they couldn't find a way to do it because all the people were eager to hear him. Well, referencing verses 41 through 44, once again, these few verses have seen fulfillment as history records these events. Interesting to note, all who heard these words and acted on what Jesus said would escape the devastation that he said would befall Jerusalem. All who refused to hear these warnings would find themselves at the end of the Roman sword, men, women, and children. It's no accident that Jesus held them responsible to know the time he references here. They had the prophets and the writings of the Old Testament, the patriarchs, Moses, yet they choose to be willfully ignorant of the time of their Messiah's coming. History will confirm that some 38 years later, Jesus spoke these things. Roman General Titus Vespasian, with the 5th, 10th, 12th, and 15th Legion of Rome, would lay siege of Jerusalem. It would be 70 AD, and the city of the temple would be destroyed. It is also compelling to note that the 5th, 10th, 12th, and 15th Legion of Rome were not Romans as we would have concluded. They hailed from Turkey, Syria, Serbia, and Bulgaria. These were from the eastern leg of the Roman Empire. The eastern leg of the Roman Empire outlasted the western leg for some 1,000 years. As we see today, these are Arab nations. Well, according to some scholars, the Jews who refused to heed the warnings of Jesus remained in the city, defiant, only to lose their lives. Over 100 or 1,000 men, women, and children died, along with some 500,000 others who starved to death or died of the disease left in war's wake as the legions encompassed the city. They held it in their grasp. Nobody in, nobody out. People were slowly dying. Well, interesting as well were the masses of Christians who remembered the words of Jesus and fled the city, finding refuge again in Pella. Not one Christian died who acted on the words of Jesus, whereas all who didn't found their lives cut short. See, the willful ignorance of the people became their downfall. The signs were apparent, and they did not see their Messiah had come, and they refused to see him for who he was. As we consider this tragedy, we ask ourselves, are we any better than they? Will he find us? And will he hold us responsible for what we're supposed to know? Tough question. Well, referencing verses 45 through 48, the den of thieves is a reference to those who took advantage of those who entered the temple without proper sacrifice. The selling of animals to sacrifice was common for those who sought to keep the law of Moses. Scholars state that these animals may have been blemished and basically unfit for sacrifice, but this is what they sold them. Jesus here acts with what can be seen as righteous displeasure for those who had turned his place of prayer into a market for monetary gain. Their authority to sell, more than likely, came from the scribes and the Pharisees. Once again, righteous indignation, as some would put it, caused Jesus to clear the temple once again. Well, that will conclude this chapter. Chapter 20 is next. Be blessed, be safe, and understand. Yeah, you're loved. We'll see you on the next study.